Despite being the protagonist or the subject in the global social engineering experiment, I had big plans for year 2024, but I had nothing but hardship and losses throughout the last year. And on December 18th, 2023, I made a video in which I talked about my plans as a way of demonstrating that I did not have murderous intentions or plans, as the intelligence conglomerate were continuously proclaiming to the public at large and the Danish government alike.
Things to come next year. I'm not planning anything murderous or violent in any way, shape or form. In fact, I'm planning to earn enough money through my small business and to put a down payment on my own home. And in that regard, I want to expand my small business. And I also want to get a dog. Those are my plans for next year.
There can be no questioning that the intelligence conglomerate saw that despite everything that they were already putting me through in their global public persecution of me, that I was not even remotely inclined to be controlled to go against my own interests. And they wanted to change that. So they took everything that I had away from me, which was very little, to make my life as miserable as possible. Because at some point in 2024, they had planned to carry out a false flag kinetic attack, or at least the perception of one. But either way, they were planning to run psychological operations, aka PSYOPs, against the public at large. And using their ability to create AI-generated video footage, the quality of which is so good that it is spitting images of real life. And that is how they would implicate, or in fact make me guilty in the eyes of the masses, of whatever content and propaganda narrative that they are broadcasting on a regular basis. They would use this ability in their planned false flag operation, and as a means of corroborating this AI generated video footage, they would use members of the public in Denmark as their de facto proxies to bear false witness against me, Stephen Bell, the so-called protagonist in the global social engineering experiment. Using members of the public to bear false witness is something that has been seen on multiple occasions previously, something that I directly prove in my video called How Intelligence Agencies Prolifically Use Members of the Public as Their De Facto Proxies. The intelligence conglomerate's intent to do this has already been clearly demonstrated in 2024. In one example that has come to light, they got two local women to falsely report me and my set Ibiza to the police in Aalborg for a home invasion in my local town. That is indeed a serious violent crime that they want to associate me with in police reports, despite knowing full well that I had nothing to do with it. So it is by no means a stretch for me to make this claim, because the intelligence conglomerate has throughout the lifespan of the program used members of the public as their de facto proxies, as a way of having plausible deniability in their direct actions and active measures against me. Ultimately, their planned false flag attack, which presumably would be a violent crime against random Danish civilians, would be carried out by intelligence, and then I would be made guilty of it in the eyes of the masses through psychological operations, where they would also use this ability to create this AI generated footage, and they would use false witnesses to corroborate said footage. Thankfully, I'm in Denmark, so this type of kinetic operation has a much harder time being green lit by the Justice Ministry or the Prime Minister compared to the US, where these type of false flag operations happen somewhat on a regular occasion for all sorts of political reasons. Just because their planned false flag operations didn't pan out for the intelligence conglomerate doesn't mean that they have stopped coming after me. They just changed their tactics to war attrition type tactics instead, and they have been coming after me in every which way imaginable to surely but slowly grind me down, both physically, mentally, but also economically. In this regard, the sleep deprivation has been unbearable. We are talking campaigns that are lasting months at a time, Practically, I'm only allowed to sleep when everybody else is awake, and the hours that I spend trying to get minimal sleep often supersede the length of time that I'm actually sleeping per night. It is so beyond belief, but it's actually happening to me day in and day out, in Denmark no fucking less, supposedly one of the least corrupt countries in the world, which everybody should know by now is definitely not true. My small business, one-stop engine shop, has for all intents and purposes been arbitrarily made illegal by the Danish government, who continuously make public announcements in this regard to the entire Danish population. My actual turnover in 2024 was almost 3 times less than in 2023, despite having the same amount of traffic to my website. Since starting my business in 2020, I have never had such a low turnover as I had in 2024. When I started my business in 2020, obviously my inventory was much less, and I didn't even have a website half of the year, and yet I had a bigger turnover then than I had in 2024. The same can be said for 2021 and 22, even though of course my inventory grew over time. Both of these years I had considerable bigger turnover than I had last year. So the sanctions against my small business have been almost all-encompassing. The Danish government is arbitrarily demanding of its citizens that they cannot do any business with me, Stephen Bell, or my small business, One Stop Engine Shop. So the Danish government is flagrantly violating my fundamental human rights, but also the entire Danish population's rights and freedoms, when they prohibit anybody from buying anything from me or my small business, unless explicitly given permission by the state. It sounds ridiculous, but is in fact the reality under this new normal here. In my view, it is incomprehensible why the general public have so much trust and admiration for the government and the intelligence conglomerate, both of which have been seen time and again lying and deceiving the public and making up all sorts of poor excuses for their bullshit and propaganda narratives. And you know, it's not just my small business either, which the intelligence conglomerate are completely ruining, because this is after all a strategic measure to prevent me from earning any money at all. So that is likewise why they have been prohibiting me from selling my Seat Ibiza for almost 2 years now. In this period of time, I have had multiple people wanting to buy my car, but were being prohibited by the Danish government arbitrarily, making it impossible for me to fulfill my plans for 2024 as I intended. You see, it's all about putting as much pressure onto me as possible, both mentally and economically, with the ultimate intention to coerce me into either breaking down and taking my own life or going on some kind of rampage. The latter is probably how they envision that they would put an end to me and this aspect of the program, that being using me as the boogeyman pretext for the global social engineering experiment. This obviously has not been directly possible because I did not turn out to be some kind of controllable Manchurian candidate, despite all of their huge efforts in this regard, with the use of neurolinguistic programming, using emerging neurosciences and electromagnetic weapons and communication systems on a continuous and torturous basis for the last 16 years straight, in an endless attempt to program me to become some kind of Manchurian candidate or a crazed wind-up tool. Obviously also why they with extreme prejudice have condemned me to live in complete isolation from everyone and everything in perpetuity, for all intents and purposes confined to my own home without the possibility of ever living any kind of meaningful life, as they actively seek to destroy anything and everything that I do, why I'm not allowed to have any kind of organic interactions or conversations, let alone relationships with other people. All of these cruel and inhuman treatment and active measures against me are being extremely enforced by the intelligence conglomerate, who are using the program's high-tech surveillance and communication systems and weapons to make abundantly sure that everybody that I get into any kind of contact with or just people in my vicinity in fact, stays in line and does what they are told over the program's real-time communication system. Even more than that, the intelligence conglomerate are using these technological advancements to conduct many of their psychological operations, aka psyops, and electronic harassment against people who are in my vicinity, only so that they can blame me for what they are doing or communicating towards innocent civilians. Unfortunately, the cognitive dissonance among the general public is so enormous that a large portion of the public actually blame me for what the intelligence conglomerate broadcast over their propaganda channels and communication systems. In fact, people continue to believe the intelligence conglomerate's propaganda and claims and accusations against me, Stephen Bell, despite the fact that I have never once been charged, let alone prosecuted and found guilty by a court of law for any of the many hundreds of serious allegations that they have levelled against me publicly, and specifically sex crimes, which seems to be their go-to method for justifying their public social persecution of me. I suppose much of this blind faith in the government and the intelligence conglomerate stems from their ability to create this real-life looking AI-generated video footage. But anybody with any kind of critical thinking skill would be able to understand that if this video footage of me supposedly committing all kinds of heinous crimes and whatnot, why are they not using it against me in the court of law, instead of throwing it away, using it in the court of public opinion via their continuous propaganda campaigns for the last 16 years without ever once using it as evidence that they proclaim it to be? And this is just a testament to how willfully ignorant the general public tends to be, not to mention their inexplicable blind trust and faith in government and intelligence agencies. And until that indoctrinated perception of the powers that be fundamentally change, then there's very little hope for me of ever getting out of this never-ending technocratic purgatory, and I will almost undoubtedly be set up at some point in time.